You're listening to Street Life, a podcast about street photography with John ST and Mark Davidson.
You're listening to Street Life. I'm Mark Davidson, a street photographer from Melbourne, Australia. And with me, as he always is, the Michael Flatley of street photography, Mr. John ST from Sydney. How are you doing?
Michael Flatley. I haven't heard that name in such a long time.
He was great, wasn't he? He can get those legs
get like
moving.
that Ponzi Irish dancing. Yeah.
Hey, it's not Ponzi. I think he
Yeah,
did.
that was the biggest load. That was the biggest load of twaddle I've ever seen.
I think he did all right with the ladies, Michael.
He probably did. He probably did a lot better than you and I, but that wouldn't be difficult, would it?
Well, we're both happily married, John. So you know.
We are. We are both very happily married, Mark. You're absolutely right.
How you been?
Yeah, I've been great.
I hear
Great, man.
Speaking of marriage, you've just had a new baby this week.
Yes, I did. I've added another one to the family.
What's
a
its
Fuji
name?
XT5.
Oh, lovely little XT5.
Yeah.
Welcome to the world.
Yeah, thanks. And I didn't really need it, but my XT3 was starting to get a bit glitchy. So I thought,
A bit glitchy. I doubt that.
yeah, it was. The shutter was getting a bit stiff and wasn't firing off all the time. And
You just had to buy a new camera. So what's that, 6 now?
I think it is. Yeah. I did look at getting another XT3 secondhand, but I thought, it's $1,200 and then XT5 is only $2,500 for a body. So I thought, I'll just eat baked beans for the next 10 years and buy another XT5.
I don't follow the range as closely as you do. They don't make the X Pro 3 anymore, do they? Is that discontinued?
No, discontinued.
I love that camera.
XE4 discontinued. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about the XT5. Any good?
Well, I don't know. I'm having a few issues with it at the minute with the autofocus.
What?
Yeah, everyone thinks, John, you're just such a Fuji fanboy. But I'm not really. They just make great gear, right? But I bought this XT5 and I've taken it out once and it keeps missing focus.
Oh,
so if it continues on, it'll be got. Yes, it's not me, Mark.
Okay.
It's not me.
All right.
The autofocus is supposed to be steady art, yeah?
Yep.
I basically shoot at F8 to F11 to F16, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can basically point it and just fire the button and something will get in focus. And I've been pointing it like I always have, like my XT3.
Mm-hmm.
Looks great on the back of the camera, and you go, well, that's a good. And then you open up, blurry as shit. And I went, this is bollocks. So the other day I was out, it was a nice pair of shoes. Some lady was wearing them. She was on her phone, so she was preoccupied. I thought, I'll get a shot. Bosh, right? Took the shot. Looked at it, blurred. It was only a metre and a half away. Took the shot again. Held the camera, dead back button focus. Little square went green. Bosh. Got it this time. Still out of focus.
What did the woman think?
She was on her phone, thank God.
Okay.
But this is the point, right?
Yeah.
Right? We're on the street, yeah? You've got to get these shots like bang. Otherwise, you just get smacked in the head by someone,
Yeah.
don't you?
Exactly. Fleeting moments.
You've got to get the shot and run. No, you don't. You don't run. you just blend into the crowd like the Matrix, you know?
So it doesn't work. You have to take it back to emergency.
No, if it doesn't work, it's going back.
Oh,
No. And I'll look for a second-hand XT3 that I was perfectly happy with. But my XT3's got 500,000 shots on it, so
500,000 shots.
Yeah.
Gee whiz.
bit long in tooth. So,
Well, I'm
not
sure.
worth paying the $800 to get it serviced and come back and then potentially break for another $800.
Wow,
Do you know what I
wow.
mean? So, yeah.
I'll get a second-hand X Pro 3. Well, I'm sorry to hear it's sick. I'm sure it'll get better.
We'll see. We'll see. You know what I mean? We'll see what happens.
Either that or you have to buy like...
But it looks, it's not.
We're not bringing up
no.
like this episode. No, that's fine.
Yeah, we might do. I went to another exhibition.
Oh, you did not.
Yeah, but the food was missed the mark again. I think I'm a bit of an albatross at the minute. Dodgy XT5 autofocus, crappy like of food, and I've naffed me back as well.
You've done your back.
Yeah. Yeah.
All that Irish dancing.
It's all that jigging. Yeah.
Well, I can see our guest is having a bit of a jiggle and a chuckle too, so we better introduce him. He's waited on the line long enough. Do the honours, John.
Yes, we do have somebody, don't we, Mark?
Yes, another Fabulous guest today.
Another fabulous guest. Today we have Jeffrey Karp, a street photographer based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Jeff's street has a fine art look to it, with a focus on minimalist composition, straight lines, and heavy, mysterious shadows. In 2020, he co-founded the photography collective Stolen Echoes and has previously worked as a curator for the Street Finder Instagram hub. In 2022, he started and released a monthly email newsletter entitled The 20% Creative. Jeff's photography has been featured by Apple, Adobe Lightroom, FUJILOVE, and has been published in a number of publications such as F8 and Fisheye magazine. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Jeff to the Street Life podcast. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thank you both for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Jeff, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you having a chat to us today. So you began taking photos around 2016 and you've accomplished a lot in that short amount of time. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got into photography.
Yeah, I've always taken photos, just kind of informally. When I had kids, we took a lot of photos around the house, but I really wasn't serious about it till 2016. We were on a family vacation and one of my kids suggested that I set up an Instagram account. And so I did, and I didn't really know much about it. And you get to that first screen where it says, do you want to have a public account or a private account? And I was like, yeah, I'll do a public account. So I set up a public account and just started posting photos, and really, really bad photos on Instagram. And, went for about 6 months posting every day. As someone living in Minnesota, we have a lot of weather. We have it's cold most of the year or many months of the year, but we do have more than 10,000 lakes. So I just posted tons of nature photos, a lot of really bad nature photos, and I was kind of confused as to where I was heading with photography. And then I got involved in one of those hubs where they do daily challenges, and I was posting every day to those, trying to kind of address the challenges. Became an editor for one of those hubs, and then as I was kind of serving in that editor or curator role, I really started to see things that kind of caught my eye. A lot of dark negative space, a lot of minimalism, a lot of the stuff that you kind of see in my work today. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. And so I went out on the streets to try to kind of duplicate that. So I went from the guy who was taking nature photos and trying to keep people out of the photos, waiting for them to pass by before I took the photo, to now trying to include people in the photos for scale, or to include that human element. And then it just all spiraled from there. Instagram is a great place to connect with people, and you find the right hashtags, and all of a sudden you go from some guy in Minnesota who's taking nature photos to somebody who's now connected to an international community of street photographers. So yeah, pretty cool. And just been really active over the last many years in the street photography community. Although I don't know if I'm really a street photographer or just somebody who just likes to chase light and shadows, but I'm sure we'll get into that as we talk further. So, but yeah, that's been my journey. And once you start and you kind of post a lot and interact with a lot of people, you just feel that urge to want to post more photos and take more photos. And so I went from kind of a everyday hobby to being an obsession over time. That for several years there was, I planned my weeks around this. I planned my vacations around photography and a variety of other things. So it slowed down a bit with the pandemic, but you can imagine that I've been pretty well connected to our community for a long time. And it's been fun to get to know a lot of people from all over the place, including both of you. Yeah. So glad to be here and chatting about it.
So we've spoken, and you just mentioned, Jeff, that you live in Minneapolis. It's probably a city that many of our listeners have heard of, but we probably don't know much about the place. A bit like Adelaide in Australia, really. People have heard of it, but don't know much about it. What's the city you like to photograph? And what are some of the challenges you have faced photographing around? Is it a small or a large city, or?
Yeah, it's a kind of an interesting place because Minnesota, we have the Twin Cities, so it's Minneapolis and St. Paul, and so there's two kind of, I guess they'd be average size U.S. cities, kind of pretty close by. Not very, really drivable between the two cities, and so when you put those two cities together, it gets to be a relatively large metropolitan area. What I've found is I've done most of my photography in Minneapolis. I really actually haven't been to St. Paul very often. So I still have a whole nother city to explore, which is kind of fun. But for Minneapolis, and especially the downtown area, it's a lot of concrete. Because the weather here is so cold for many months of the year, a lot of our architecture and a lot of the kind of the urban planning has been about moving people out of the outdoors into kind of temperature controlled spaces like skyways that connect buildings over the streets and things like that. And so, so there's not as much kind of ground traffic in Minneapolis as there is in a lot of other cities, which for someone who, if you're a street photographer who really likes, kind of interacting with people and kind of getting into the midst of crowds, we don't have a lot of crowds a lot of times in the downtown area. But for me, as somebody who likes kind of the light and shadow, geometry and things like that, having silhouettes and people kind of moving through spaces where light is kind of, sneaking between buildings, kind of casting shadows off of these skyways. It's been the perfect city for my type of street photography. And it's been a lot of fun to explore, especially up to the time of the pandemic. Obviously, the city got to be pretty quiet once the pandemic hit and things like that. So, but yeah, it's a really interesting city in that regard. I'm sure there's many other parts of the city that I haven't explored because, as I said, it's probably there probably are those crowds. We have the fairs and other things, and I just don't tend to kind of thrive in those environments. So I tend to find these much more kind of calmer, minimalist locations to seek out scenes that I enjoy. So, but yeah, it's actually, I think it's an underrated city. We also get a lot of great light in Minnesota. We have longer days, especially in the summer and in the spring. So you have you can be out shooting, until 9 or 10 p.m. at night sometimes. So it's so we have a lot more sun than most other places, which has been great because I've been other places trying to kind of replicate some of the shots I take in Minneapolis, and you run into kind of the 50, 60, 70% clouds and things like that. And then you're kind of waiting for sun and I guess I'm relatively impatient. So I tend to kind of wait for my scenes, but at the same point, I like to, kind of hopefully be really efficient with the time I have, because I don't usually have a whole lot of time when I go out to take photos. So.
Well, it's really interesting you say that because, you touched on that you have cold, harsh winters, but looking at your work, it's there's a lot of light, there's a lot of contrast. I'm sure the summers are, probably not as long as you'd like them, but what do you do in the winter? Do you go into hibernation, or how do you take photos then?
Yeah, I mean, it's, in the winter, I wrote down because I figured I would think, okay, what's Fahrenheit to Celsius? So a lot of our winter, we're somewhere in the -20 to -26 Celsius area. Oh boy. So it's pretty cold. So you're not out very much. And if you are, you tend to be bundled up with many layers of clothes. And so most of your, the human elements in your photos just tend to be this kind of mush of clothes. There's really not a lot of structure or definition to a silhouette or to any type of person in those environments. And so I do go a bit into hibernation. For many years there, I would kind of comb back through the archive of photos that I take in other times of the year. That was the time of the year on Instagram where I would kind of play around with Snapseed in my phone and try to create composites of images and kind of extracting a silhouette from one photo and putting it into others. All the photography I do on the streets is all candid, but when I'm, in hibernation mode, it's okay, let's create some visual art with some of the things we've already had. Or as I said, it could be going back to the archive and maybe looking at post-processing differently, maybe posting black and white versus other things. And then, even exploring, just making things on the computer. So I try to be creative all the time. It's something I need to do just to kind of be a stress, stress management and things like that. So, but yeah, it can be, it's pretty harsh in the winter. And, but that being said, a lot of folks in Minnesota do like to be out in the winter. We do have people that ride their bicycles to work when it's that cold. Wow. The lakes are all frozen over. And so what I've been kind of exploring the last couple of years has been getting outside when the ground is covered with snow or ice. And then you kind of have these very minimalist white kind of snowy scenes, which has been fun to do as well. Because all the lakes are frozen, you can just kind of be walking on the lakes and catching people that are, meeting and gathering and doing things that you wouldn't obviously be able to do in the summer months. So yeah, it's just exploring all the weather conditions, but it's definitely harsh conditions at certain times of the year.
So just talking about your camera in harsh weather conditions, what system do you use, Jeff? And also, how does that system handle the harsh conditions?
Yeah, I have all Fuji cameras and then I have an iPhone for my smartphone. So I use a, X100F is kind of my everyday camera in my bag. Right. When obviously if it's really harsh, like we're getting snow or rain or things like that, I'm trying to bring in that camera out because it's not weather sealed. I have an XT3 as well. And I don't really do very much. I've had a couple times when it's been that cold where it literally just shuts off and it won't turn back on until it warms up. I have to sit in the car for a little bit, and then it's like, okay, it's working again. And that's usually a sign that I should probably go in because I can't feel my fingers or my toes either. And but you don't recognize that once they're numb. So it's a kind of an early warning sign for frostbite, I guess, would be my camera shuts off. So yeah, other than that, I mean, I don't really have any. I'm really not probably the best camera owner. I just kind of, as long as I have a battery in it and it turns on, I'm pretty much happy. I don't really. I mean, I've kind of learned a lot about photography just by kind of playing around with things on the dials, or maybe watching YouTube or things I've seen on Instagram. So I'm not professionally trained. I haven't done any schooling for it. So there's probably things I'm supposed to do to my camera to weather seal it better or to do things, but I really don't have the slightest idea. And so far, everything's been okay. So hopefully I'm doing things correctly, even though I don't actually know if it's correct or not. So the other kind of hazard there's been a few times I have one of my lenses I have a 56, which is a little bit longer. And I've fallen on the ice a few times. And so there's a few kind of dings and kind of, marks on the lens itself, not on the glass, but on the actual housing of the lens, because sometimes you just can't stay standing on the ice. So, just kind of.
You've just added a bit of character to it, Jeff, is what we're saying.
Exactly. It was kind of a non-intentional camera movement, basically. So, but it's still working fine. And it's been hanging in there throughout all these conditions for many years now. So
I'm just going to ask a controversial question here, Jeff.
Get ready. You're
in the field of dentistry, aren't you? And we all know that Leica have specifically marketed it towards dentists. Why have you chosen Fuji and not got on the Leica bandwagon, Jeff? Come on. Are you worried that you're going to slip on the ice and crack that $12,000 lens, or?
Well, I'm not a traditional dentist, so I teach, and so so maybe that's part of it. Maybe I missed that seminar or that lecture in dental school when they talked about cameras to purchase as a dentist. So, I haven't. Once again, I think for me, the Fuji all the Fuji cameras was just like probably right place, right time on Instagram, because at that time, you kind of joined the platform. When I first started, in street photography, because as I mentioned, I was kind of I was trying to do landscape photography. So the first actual true camera I bought was a Nikon D810. And that was a really large camera. And so walking around the streets with this very large camera, that didn't seem to work. And so at that time, I was following many, many people using Fuji. I'm like, well, that must just be the camera I'm supposed to use. And so that's what I did. And then as you you kind of get to use it and you realize how much it's just fun to use. And it's continued to be fun to use. I don't see myself switching, no matter being a dentist or not. I feel really happy with my Fuji cameras. So
it's just a bit of an in-house joke, because generally only dentists can afford to buy them. Or that used to be the case, not so much anymore, I don't think, because everyone seems to have a Leica these days, don't they, Mark?
Well, mine's secondhand from the 80s, so it's
still costs more than all my Fujis put together.
I don't know about that. But Jeff, you just mentioned you are a dental educator, and which is not traditionally a creative field. So tell us about. I assume that you're a self-taught photographer. So how did that process happen for you, and which photographers did you look up to when you were getting into street photography?
Yeah, so I think all my journey has kind of been through the lens of Instagram, and then kind of what you encounter when you get there. So yeah, I'm completely taught through Instagram, YouTube, and perhaps whatever books I might have found along the way. But I definitely didn't start out by understanding who were the kind of the masters or the kind of those that we look up to. I just was really, who am I seeing their work? What's kind of grabbing me usually at the visual level, like, wow, this is really interesting. I want to try to create something similar to this. And so, I found a lot of good folks on Instagram that I was just really inspired by. When I look back, I wrote down a couple of names just to kind of remember. I was seeing a lot back in those days. I wrote down Brandon Wong, Mr. Brandon Wong. So he's in the UK. I just remember seeing his work for the first time, and I was like, wow, look at the light, the color, geometry. I'm like it just made sense to me. Pauly B, who we all know now, and who's done a lot of the walkie-talkie series. I learned of his work and started following him when he was living in Chicago, when he was shooting all light and shadow work in black and white in the city there. And I love going to Chicago. It's been a great place for some of the photography I've done over the years. And so I really enjoyed his work. Valerie Six, Mark Fernley. And then later on, I found some videos on YouTube. Ryan Takai, who's in Toronto, he goes by Fraction. He actually hasn't been active on Instagram for a long time, but he had some really great videos that I just kind of stumbled upon that I've watched over and over and again over the years to just kind of, he breaks down kind of how he thinks about composition and things like that. And so there was just, you just kind of find people. And then certainly as you go deeper, then you kind of learn of, Spicy Meatball, and you learn of 6 Street Under, and you just keep going and going and going, Josh Jack and all the others, and certainly you guys. And so, just a huge community. I mean, when I started on Instagram, I kind of think back to like the community at that time. The SPI community was something like 100,000 followers at the time, and now it's like, I don't know, 1.7 or 2 million or something like that. So this whole community just grew right at the time I joined Instagram and got involved, and so it was kind of right place, right time to just see so much work and then be really active for 4 or 5 straight years every day. So I learned a lot through that process, and and then, just getting a lot of good feedback as well, both publicly in comments and also DMs of things along the way. So it's a really supportive community that we have. And it's a really fun part to share your work. I actually know more people. I feel like I know more people internationally at this point than I do in Minneapolis or the Twin Cities. It's a small community for street photography, I think. And so it's kind of been kind of a backwards progression for me of like learning about people internationally first, and then kind of trying to make connections locally later on.
So Jeff, we all sort of give ourselves the label street photographers, but once you get into the genre a little bit, you start to find out that lots of people have very strong opinions about what's street and what's not. So is there a reason why you've sort of shied? The traditional street is like, get in your face, blam blam. If you're not within punching distance, then it's not real street. Is there a reason why you've shied away with taking those? You mentioned Paulie B, who's probably takes the more traditional street type shots. Is there a reason why you've shied away from getting really close to people? Because you tend to keep your distance, and often a lot of your images, there's a human element in it, but they're obscured in some way. You don't often see their faces, etc. Is there a reason why that's drawn to you more than them wham in your face, get assaulted type stuff?
Yeah, no, I think for me, I think both my personality is such that I certainly would like to avoid conflict. I enjoy kind of being an observer of the scene. I think I've just also aesthetically, I've really liked, I think most of my work focuses around space, focuses on light and shadow, focuses on architecture and other things, and basically just light interacting with things around it. And hopefully that also includes a human element when it's able to be involved. And for me, I've never even really tried to do the other type, which would be that kind of up close. It hasn't really been interesting to me. I enjoy looking at it when others, and there's so many that do it well. But for me, it's just really it just makes a lot more sense to just as to what I like and kind of the aesthetics of things. I'll also say that, as somebody who has a family, it's been interesting to kind of get feedback from people in my family about kind of what street photography looks like to someone who's not in the community. And I think that's probably shaped a bit of kind of how I approach things as well, of like, this is what you look like when you're out on the street kind of stuff. And so, for me, I just, I try to be, I tend to be very, open and just very like, if I'm out on the streets taking photos, like I'm not out there trying to hide what I'm doing, but I also am not really interested in kind of getting up into the mix. And for me, I think, as I said, I think my work tends to stay on more of just kind of an aesthetic level. And, maybe someday it'll become more about narrative, but for now it's just kind of been something that, for me, it kind of works. It's something that I find to be interesting, and it's something that keeps me going out to take photos the next time. So, I don't know that I even call myself a street photographer for a period of time there, because I was so kind of every day in the community. I felt like that was an identity or label to apply to myself. But at this point, I just like to take photos of anything that I feel like I want to photograph. And I think my Instagram's probably a really good example of that, because most street photographers aren't taking pictures of still life eggs on their kitchen counter, or or architecture or other things that they happen to see that just look interesting. So I'm cool with just being a photographer, or just someone who likes to take photographs. That works for me.
Yeah, well, that was actually going to be my question to you, Jeff. How do you feel about that label, street photographer, in not just with your own work, but in the main? And because I know you take a lot of architectural photos as well. So, do you think that that's important now in 2023, that label of street photographer, or are we all just sort of moving to the space we're all just quote unquote photographers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there's so many people that talk about this right online and in other spaces, and I think I don't know. I just always have felt like there's parts of what I understand for street photography that I hold important. Things like the moment being kind of candid and undisturbed. That's always been a part of what I do. I'm not looking to set things up or kind of in any way kind of craft the moment, but because that's really where the joy comes. And beyond that, everyone who wants to kind of figure out where they fit within the larger community. I mean, if someone says I'm not a street photographer, I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, I take photos. If they say, nowadays we're dealing with like, is this a photo or not a photo? Like, I'm just happy to know that I take out this box that captures light, and I think we still call that photography, and that's good enough for me. And if someone feels like they want to put more of a label on it, I mean, that's okay. I tend in all aspects of my life to just not really kind of, I tend to think very openly of like even you mentioned earlier, like you're a dentist in this. I'm like, like kind of, but maybe not. Like I define myself by other things as well. And so, sometimes there's things you do, but there's also things that you identify as. And so I just enjoy making photos. And if people want to call me a street photographer, fine. Back in the day, it just made sense to kind of say that, because every post would have hashtags for street photography, and but I don't know if that's really the best indication that you're a street photographer at this point. And maybe it probably wasn't even back then either, but at that time in my journey, it just seemed like that made the most sense. And now that I don't even apply hashtags to my photos, I don't know, maybe I don't have any identity now. I'm just a no hashtag photographer, which is totally fine with me.
I like that. No hashtag photographer.
We can start that. No hashtag.
When t-shirts, we can get some hats, the whole thing, right?
Sounds good to me. Well, you've got two
little stickers on the Leica, the whole thing.
But I think that's an interesting thing you pointed out, Jeff. I think we all need to, when we first start, we're looking to connect with people and try to find a little bit of a group setting where we can, find where we belong. But then when we become more comfortable with what we do or what we're doing, and we have a better understanding of what we're doing, because a lot of us just fall into it, becomes less important. And I just took a photo recently where it was just a window and light and blah blah blah, and I put it up, and someone complained that it wasn't a street photograph, so because it didn't have a human element in it. But do you think that street photography, when we just spoke, like you mentioned you didn't want to be labeled it as such. I call myself an urban / street photographer now. Whatever, Mark, probably the similar. Do you think it has to have a human element? Like there has to be a person in your shots to be considered a street photo, or not?
No, I mean, I think that there's definitely the essence of humanity in photos that don't include humans directly in the photo. I think that there's that sense of time and place, that you that there's been a person here, and then that there's going to be a person here again. And I think that that's always interesting. And I've been starting to work on like collecting some photos from my archive and some new photos of like just that idea. And it's been really interesting to look for that type of photo on the streets, because for me, everything's always been light and shadow. So now I'm trying to find like in all different kind of weather conditions, and just kind of looking for those more narrative moments. But no, I don't think that the human element is really that essential. Now I do think like if I'm walking on the street and I look up and I see that there's a building above me and I take a photo, I don't know that I would call that street photography, even though I'm on the street. But I also look at, a lot of the photos that I share on Instagram. I look at those as kind of being like repetitions to prepare myself for seeing things that happen on the street. And I also like to kind of think, what would this look like if there was a human in the scene? And even things like when I do still life and other things, like what would this look like if this was in a market? What would this look like if this was, I caught I noticed the scene in a restaurant or other things, like what would this look like? And so I think I approach all of my photography with that kind of background thinking of like applying a street kind of mentality to all the kind of the different types of photos that I take, even though sometimes they're definitely not like a street photography, photograph. They're just, a capture of light and shadow and things like that. But that's how when I do go out on photo walks, a lot of, over the years, like if I'm standing at an intersection and there's really nothing happening, I'm still taking photos. Like I'm not just like, okay, I have to have a human in every shot. Like let's make the most of the time we have with the camera and great light and shadows and other things. And so a lot of the stuff I've shared over the years has been, a lot of times in the same scene where I've taken a photo with a human, there's been photos I've shared later without humans that, it's just working the scene in different ways and just wanted to see what things look like photographed. I think that's fascinating to me. And sometimes it's most of the times with my camera, but I love shooting with my iPhone as well. And I've been known, I walk around, where I work and in campus and things like that. And I have my phone out most of the time ready to take photos because you just never know when you're going to see something. And most of my early learning around photography was with my iPhone, turning it to black and white or noir mode and just looking at scenes with light and, kind of dialing in the exposure and the focus and then taking those photos as well. And so I think there's always something to learn from taking photos, even if you're not necessarily in a moment that would be considered street photography.
Well, Jeff, you do take amazing photographs, and I assume you also teach people really well about how to take out wisdom teeth, but you also write really well. John mentioned in the introduction your Substack, a 20% creative. Tell us how important writing is to your creative process, and also subsequent question, you detailed in one of your posts a pretty horrendous experience you did have on the street a couple of years ago and how that changed your approach to photography.
Yeah, so I think as part of my work, I certainly do need to write a fair amount. It's part of my job as an educator, and so I think I've kind of built some of those skills over the years. I do struggle when I set up my newsletter. It was the intent was there to try to kind of push myself to write more often. And for a while there, I was doing a pretty good job, and I've kind of fallen off to like not being as productive as I'd like to be with writing. But I do like writing. I've always kind of liked, expressing myself also through poetry. So I don't know, I guess I'm creative in a variety of different ways. But I do find that there's times when I'm trying to process something, whether it's something, I don't know, just my interaction with the world around me, that writing is a good way to do that. I feel like I process most of my daily life through visuals, but then I think through my writing. And so I think that's how it tends to come out. And you mentioned that's the event a few years ago. And so this was kind of right in the middle of the pandemic, actually a few weeks after, as I'm in Minneapolis, this is, where George Floyd was murdered. And so, a lot changed in the city, kind of around that time, both between the pandemic and also that event as well. And so, so I was going into the city. This was, kind of in the summer months there. One of my first times back in the city after kind of all the lockdowns. And I was assaulted on the streets before I could actually get my camera and my bag out of my car. Someone was trying to steal my car and assaulted me in the process. And so for me, that was, I wasn't really prepared for that. And I kind of look back and I wish I kind of had been a little bit more street smart at the moment. For me, it was just a kind of a eyes wide open experience of like, I've been on the streets for all these years and taking photos. I'm out there. In the past, it would be, I'd put in my earbuds or my headphones or whatever. I'd walk the streets, take photos, and really kind of had that sense of safety that that day kind of definitely changed for me. And it took a while, for me to kind of move past that. I think at this point, I feel like I'm past it. And I'm glad to see that our city's kind of back to a more kind of a pre-pandemic and kind of a busier, kind of active place. The city became very quiet, and for a period of time there was a lot of crime, and so it was something that I just kind of happened to be at the right place at the wrong time, and so I learned a lot through that, and and for me, the writing that I had was about processing what it's like when, the things that become part of your identity, like your camera, like the things you take with you on your street photography, your photo walks, when all that stuff is taken from you, like how do you kind of how do you restore that identity, or should you change? And so that was kind of the thought around that writing. And so it was an interesting time. I'm kind of glad I moved past it, but at the same point, it's you learn from that, and I definitely approach the streets a bit differently now. Both in Minneapolis, or if I'm in another city somewhere else taking photos, just to be a bit more aware and learn from some of the mistakes I might have had at that time, just by kind of being distracted at a time when I probably shouldn't have been. So so I enjoy writing. I need to write some more, and so I'm not keeping up my end of the bargain of calling myself 20% creative if I'm not writing enough, but we'll see. Well, hopefully, maybe sometime soon I'll break through and write some more. But it's been fun, and with Stolen Echoes, we've done some writing over the years as well. So I've enjoyed being able to kind of pair up some photos with some writing. So hopefully there'll be more of that in the future. But for whatever reason, it's just much easier to focus on visual, creativity for the most part when I'm tired after a day of work or other things. So,
well, you can only do.
But maybe I'll write about this. I'll write about the podcast.
Yeah.
That'll be my. I'll unpack everything from the podcast.
You can only do so much with your day. You mentioned when we were just chatting before the podcast, you've got 3 daughters, I believe, and a wife and a dog, and you've got career and you've got responsibilities, and you take photos, and there's only so much time in the day you can do everything, Jeff, and you might have the best intentions, but something's got to give sometimes, doesn't it?
It does. And I for a long time, it was like not sleeping enough. And so I'm trying to sleep a bit more. And so at this point, I think it's probably a worthwhile trade-off of like sleep is more important than writing an extra like newsletter at this point. But we'll see. I'm coming close to, the hibernation period comes pretty soon. We tend to start getting cold before the end of November. So got a few more months left where I can get outside, and then maybe I'll do some more writing in the winter months when I can't get out with the camera very much.
That means if winter's coming for you, our summer's on its way, Jeff. So
that's true.
Bad for you, good for us. But Jeff, just touching on your writing a bit more, when I was doing a bit of research for the podcast, came across your blog entitled Resistance, where you'd said you'd reached a plateau and a bit of a roadblock with your photography. Is that, what were some of the challenges and fears that you came across to put you in that position to be able to speak so openly and write about that? And have you overcome them? And what did you do if you have overcome them, what have you done to move forward?
Yeah, I think in that piece, it's kind of, there's been a few themes over the years. One of the themes I would say is this idea that, that I've, for many years, for probably my whole time on Instagram, I've kind of been this, although I might take photos of different subjects, it's been a very similar style all the way through. And so you kind of get to this point of like, okay, it's just another one of those photos where, he looks for like light and then shadow and maybe some color and a shape, and there you go. And so, there's that kind of like moving past that, I think, is part of the resistance. And then that piece was really specific about this idea of, we as photographers and as, creators and makers, we make all these things, and then, what do we do with them after we make them? And then, for some, we want to sell what we make, or we want to have it be displayed somewhere besides social media or other things. And, and I've kind of just gone back and forth over the years about how to do that. And, and I think I'm probably not the best person to get out there and really sell what I do. It's just kind of like if people find it, or, if people, express interest, like people have to literally have to take the action in order for me to be like, oh, like you're actually interested in this. And so for me, it's just that resistance of like, kind of like the imposter syndrome of like, well, you take photos, but that's just because it's on Instagram or it's this and that. And so I think a lot of us go through that. You have to kind of embody the role of being not just a maker and a creator, but also someone who like sees tremendous value in what you do, and you're willing to maybe go outside your comfort zone to tell people that you really value what you do. Instagram, and being someone who just kind of had this whole photography journey occur on Instagram, like there's really no inherent value in Instagram, right? It's a free platform where we share our photos for free. And so how do you get to this point of value? And, and so I think that's been something that's just for a long time for me, it's been like, I want to take it serious. I would like to, not to like trade out one job for another or even have like a side hustle, but just to say like I'm creating things, and that like for me it'd just be great for people to say I have this photo hanging in my house, or I have this book on my coffee table, and but I struggle to kind of get to that point. So that's kind of for me where the resistance has been of like how to break through that. And I don't know that I have. I think I probably break through in some ways, and then I take a few steps back. And I think that's probably part of the artist or the creative's journey of like you're always trying to figure out like how to do this. But yeah, if you guys have advice, I certainly welcome it, and from the listeners as well. Tell me how to do it, because I would love to just make with purpose, and and the purpose for others as well. Not just, I get great satisfaction out of making. But I'd also love to be able to make with the purpose of being able to bring, some type of tangible product or something to somebody else that they would like to look at every day in their house, or, on their, place of work or whatever it might be. So,
well, it's not just you, Jeff. I think we all suffer. Everyone who's a photographer or creator in some form or another suffer from very similar things to what you are. So unfortunately, we don't have any answers, do we, Mark?
No, but it is a really interesting discussion, and it was that was going to be my follow-up question, Jeff, because I was going to borrow a question from Human Katuzi's YouTube channel, and on it he was discussing legacy. And is that something you do think about? You sort of just touched on it then. Would you like your photographs to outlive you in some way?
I've never thought of that at all. I think that's I think that's a great thing. And I know, you've had some other guests on the podcast where I think that their photos will live on in legacy. I don't know that I see mine doing that at the current time, which might be part of the resistance, but I think I have a ton to learn. I'm just kind of getting started, even though I've been kind of at this for a few years. I think it just in order for legacy to be there, you just have to have something that has just such meaning in like across time and space. And I don't know that my photos do that at this point. For me, they have meaning in time and space, and I hope that I hope that the sensory, when we're on the streets, we have all the senses are, we're sensing everything that's happening. And I still remember so many of those moments. And for me, there's legacy, but and maybe that's all that's important. But to have it be legacy for others, I don't think my photos are at that point in any way. If they can inspire some people to get out and take photos, that's great. But at this point, I don't see my photos being a point of legacy. But I also might be selling myself short, and that's part of the resistance we just talked about. So, but I have a healthy sense of I enjoy what I do. I enjoy the making, and I just hope I never lose the memories of those times when I did take the photos, or that time that we all remember when you're waiting for that subject to do the thing you hope they're going to do so you can get the photo that you've already pre-visualized. I just don't want to forget those moments, because that's what really street photography is for me, that candid, like undisturbed moment where you, like, for me, it's kind of bringing order from chaos. I'm like, seeing something that I could be standing next to somebody else and they don't see the scene that I see, and how to kind of bring all the elements together. I just hope that I don't ever lose that sense and those memories. That's the legacy that I hope to keep for now. And then maybe over time it'll be bigger, but for now that's good enough for me.
Well, what would you say would be your proudest moment on the street? When I say proudest moment, what immediately comes to mind?
Proudest moment. when you said that, just because you said what would be the thing that popped, I had one situation where I had an encounter with someone on the streets, and I think I handled it well. And it was one of those situations where you're trying to take a reflection shot on the windshield of a car. And I was doing that, and I didn't realize that there was a person in the car. And then they got out, and they were like much taller than me, and they were looking down going, "What are you doing?" And I think I handled myself, and I think I wrote about this years ago on Instagram in a post, but it was one of those situations that, just as you said, that was the first thing that popped in my mind of like, I think I handled that one well. I didn't I kind of managed the stress, I managed the conflict. I think it was a productive, positive thing. And whenever I look at that photo, I remember that time. So that's just what came to mind. So I'm sure there's others, but that was the first thing that popped up. So.
That's hilarious. Jesse Marlowe has a similar story. He was photographing a leaf on someone's bonnet, and he said he was there for literally 10, 15, 20 minutes trying to get the exact angle right. And then after all that time, someone sounded the horn, and they were watching him the whole time thinking, what are you doing? He's just sitting there for 20 minutes trying to get this photograph this leaf. So yeah, it's funny. You got to always look and see if there's someone in the car.
Yeah. And I've, over the years, I really enjoy like seeing those types of things. And we have a lot of reflective kind of glass buildings in the city. And so there's just no shortage of those opportunities, but I'm always kind of like, remember that one time? So I'm always looking around and, but at the same point, I've feel like if I could manage that situation unexpectedly, I'd be ready. Now I'm ready for that situation. So now I feel like I could handle it even better and kind of go from, kind of diffuse any conflict that might occur and also just be like, hey, that was a really great photo. Have you seen this? And, and kind of go from there. I think those are the learning experiences you have on the street that, they have them the first time, and then you take what you learn from that to really get better for the next time. Most of my interactions on the street that have been more challenging have not been with are typically not with the subject of the photo. It's usually with someone else who's kind of watching things, go about, and you're like, everything's fine. It's all good. I'm not here to cause any problems, and you kind of move on from there. So
that's a problem with reflections. You concentrate on the reflection, you don't see past it. And then it's not until you look at, you've got your shot or whatever, and you go, oh, there's someone on the other side of that glass. You were so concentrating on the reflection.
Yeah, and they're looking at you like, what? Why are you looking right at me with the camera, like pointing at me?
Literally a foot from their face, and they're like, what the?
Absolutely.
But Jeff, I just want to touch back. You've mentioned Instagram quite a lot in our chat so far, and you've talked about the relationships that you've built. And the connections you've made through it. The platform's gone down the shitter a bit of late. And Mark and I were just talking about it earlier, about it. We use it more as a communication tool than actually sharing our photography now. But you created Stolen Echoes, which I'm guessing was probably a collective that came all about through predominantly Instagram and the connections you made. Tell us how that all came about, because it involved quite some well-known people. There's Annette Lang, there's Hugh Rawson that we've had on here, and Tim Hurley, who's also in Sydney, and he was running Street Finder, which was quite a successful and large Instagram hub at the time, and you were also curator on that. How did all that come about?
I kind of stimulated that group to kind of come together. These are all people that I had been kind of interacting with in various ways on Instagram. It's actually interesting how this whole conversation will come full circle with this discussion. So I reached out to Chris and to Tim and to Hugh and to Dan, and then Dan knew Kevin, and so that's kind of how we kind of connected initially as a group. And really, the reason I kind of reached out to the guys that I did at that time, this was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I kind of, for work, I was already kind of becoming very savvy on Zoom, and I was like, wow, this would be really great to just connect with photographers on Zoom. Like, we should do this, and will give us something to do. Like, I kind of had a good sense, kind of being in healthcare, that like this pandemic thing was not going to be like 1 or 2 weeks of like, we're just going to kind of take a little break and then be back out to the world again. I had a sense it was going to be a much longer thing. And so yeah, I just kind of reached out to them. And the reason I reached out to those that I did was, at that time on Instagram, a lot of them were writing a lot. And there was like, Hugh had a blog that he was keeping up, and Tim was doing a lot of writing and work through Street Finder, and Chris as well. And so for me, I just kind of saw that the conversations, if the conversations were just focused strictly around photography, I mean, they'd be great, but they could be even better as a group if we also could write about what we do and maybe have some more commentary or critique and things like that. And so that's kind of how it started. And then, and as I said, everyone kind of agreed to kind of join in, and then we had, and then Kevin joined us through Dan, and then it kind of moved from there. And then as you see the kind of the group now with Annette as well, who's like an amazing writer as well. So it's like I think that's just an important part of of kind of what we do, is that we want to be able to express ourselves, not just visually, but also through words. And so I think that's kind of been the theme through the group. And it turned out that many of us are, very few of us, or actually none of us are photographers for our jobs, right? So we're all doing other things, and many of us are involved in education and things like that. So it just kind of, I didn't know all that at the time, but it just kind of came about. So, but yeah, it was great to do that. And we've kind of been together now since, I think maybe March or April of 2020. Initially we were connecting pretty much weekly. And then now we're kind of down to, a couple times a month or maybe monthly. And, but it's still good to kind of connect. And as you said, as Instagram has changed, and, frankly, all of social media has changed, these kind of off social media kind of interactions and collectives, I think, are more and more important. And so I think I would strongly encourage people, if they have the opportunity to connect with people. We learn so much about each other through Zoom and being able to have those interactions. And then once you do get to meet some of these people, if you do get to be in the same physical space as them, on the streets, you already feel like you know them. And we've had that opportunity as a group recently to do that with several of the members. And so, I think it's been great to have that. And so I'd encourage others, if they have opportunity to do that. And it doesn't take much. I mean, like if you have access to Zoom, just reaching out to someone and saying, do you just want to jump on a Zoom call? I mean, it doesn't take time. It doesn't take any money to do this at this point, or, through any of the other platforms exist. So I think it's great. And I've pursued that in some other ways with people over the last couple of years as well, to just connect and have a call and, and share some work with share screen. It's great. And you get to see, people's work on a much bigger screen than you do on Instagram or any kind of mobile device. And so definitely a strong proponent of that model, and connecting with people in your local community. As I said, I'm still kind of working on that in the Twin Cities, but I think that's such an important part is meeting people like physically on the streets. And I think the pandemic showed us that social media is great, but it can be fleeting, and it's much better to build these rich relationships in person as well.
I think it's really important. I think, it's a wonderful thing you do. And it's, as you say, if you can form these little groups, it's kind of inspiring. And, we sort of get a bit caught up in just scrolling on Instagram all day long. But yeah, if you can, get a bit deeper and, discuss the reasons why we're doing this. And you were saying before about where does all this end up? I guess in your group, you probably have discussed projects and exhibitions and things like that, and books. And so, I think it can be really, really rewarding and valuable.
Yeah, and as in these groups as well, like certainly you can keep the conversation to just being about photography or social media, but the richness of a group like this is being able to just welcome people into your life as a friend as well. And so a lot comes, certainly through the pandemic, there was so many things going on around the world, and and our group is in the US and Australia and the UK and France, and so it's like so many different things are occurring. So, our conversations were wide reaching, not just focus on photography alone. So, so much of what we do is about the context of the moment and what's happening in your city or your country or other things. And so, just a lot to learn. So I totally encourage people to do that. And, it's a lot of fun.
Oh, just one quick one. Why Stolen Echoes? Where's that come from?
Wow. That we can have a whole podcast on how we came to the name. I don't even know where to start with that, but let's just say that was we spent a lot of time. We thought of a lot of different things, and ultimately, I think on our actual website for the collective, you can kind of see how we defined it, and I think that's kind of speaks to kind of the photography that we as a group at the time were kind of looking at, and this idea that the moments are candid, and they're they just kind of happen and they're fleeting and things like that. And so but we spent a lot of time, and then once you try to do this, you have to find a a name that also like has not been taken already, and that's super challenging.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad we have a name, and once we zeroed in on a name, we haven't talked again about ever changing the name. So which I'm very happy about, because that was several calls that we were really pushing. We were pushing to find the right name, and so I think we've embraced it, and I think it's been good for the group over the last couple of years. So hopefully, many more to come.
Just touching on Stolen Echoes, you were explaining what it was all about. It's not just about photography; it's about all different types of creative mediums. Okay, now something just came up recently that's a bit controversial on lens culture. Again, AI, and they just released a load of pictures from a photographer who'd done some AI created images. In your group dynamic, have you discussed the specter of AI, and what are your opinions on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a group, we really haven't. I think we've focused pretty much just talking about photography. I think we all just really enjoy that, and I think for me personally, I haven't tried any of the AI software. I'm definitely intrigued by it, because I mean, I was the guy like 3 or 4 years ago, like trying to make art in like PowerPoint, or like on my phone in Snapseed, or this last couple of years in Adobe Illustrator. So I think there's lots of ways to create visual art. I don't, the discussion for me around like, is this photography or not? Like I just kind of feel like I know when I go out on the streets and I'm like, carrying this camera with me, that just feels like photography, and everything else just feels like art of some kind. And but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's I've seen the post you're talking about, and I definitely saw the dialogue there. I just tended to kind of keep scrolling, because I was like, I know where this one's going, and I just kind of moved on. But yeah, I think I'm fascinated by what will come of this, because for me, I've been doing a lot of trying to make books and things over the last couple of years, and kind of learning these various processes. And I'm just like, wow, I could really see how this is going to change like bookmaking. If you write something and you can then express yourself, and then there's an image that goes with your writing, or things. I mean, the potential is tremendous. But as to how it relates to street photography, I just like capturing light in a camera, and that's kind of what I'm going to continue to do, and hope to see the work of people who are doing something similar, and even if it's if Instagram changes and other things change, like as I said, once again, you just find people that you can interact with that work. And I've kind of moved past the point of looking at Instagram as being the place where I'm going to learn exactly where I fit. I'm very happy with being in the spaces between definitions at this point.
So you don't think AI is going to be the end of photography as we know it?
No, I mean, I think it's going to. I think it has a lot of utility. I would say that, I read something. Josh Rose, who a photographer, writes really prolifically on Medium. He wrote an amazing article about kind of like why photography would stay. And it really comes down to kind of just capturing the moments of life. And I think as long as we continue to capture those true moments of life, and the memories, and the sensory experience of living life, I think that photography is always going to be around. And, even if you can make something that looks like a real moment, I think you have to live through those moments. And that's what photography is as well. Like, I want to remember when my fingers were like numb and frozen. I want to remember when the camera shut off, and I remember all those things that we talked about earlier. That's photography as much as the final product to me. And knowing that it's a stress relief, and it's a variety of other things, like, but will I do make AI images? I could see myself finding a utility for it, but not blending, probably not like one or the other, finding some other use and some other creative workflow that's not photography. But anyway, probably a much longer discussion there, but yeah, I just enjoy the moments, and enjoy, just, as I said, just taking the camera out, and, and especially as someone who had that incident a few years ago where you have things taken away, you realize how much you miss it. And, I've been really intentional about enjoying those moments of photography since then.
I think that's great advice. And Jeff, we are coming up to our allotted time, but I wanted to sneak a couple of quick questions in. John mentioned in the introduction there that you've worked with Apple or had some of your images appear on the Apple platforms. So how did all that come about? Because it's a huge achievement. I just wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, I wish there was like some really complicated way. I mean, with Instagram, you just hashtag your stuff shot on iPhone, and then, I guess if the right person at Apple sees it, they reach out, and there's a whole process for them to kind of, like you have to kind of agree to whatever their terms are to be able to share it. And so I had an image that I think it's linked on my Instagram somewhere that they decided to share, and that was an interesting experience because it was seen by a lot of people, and so it had a very large. There's a lot of reach. So that was a very busy week when that was posted, because all of a sudden it was seen by like 250,000 likes or something. So there was a lot of people that saw it, and so, but which was fun for me. The interesting part was it was a photo that I created that I took that was of one of my daughters when she was younger. So it has a personal connection, and then it also is this interesting thing. And I'm an Apple person all the way through. All of the devices in my life are Apple devices, and so so that was just a really great thing to have happen, just to be able to say that something that I've created is on like Apple's gallery at some point in time, but nothing bigger than that. There's been like no commissions or things like that. So although if they're listening, obviously I'm sure they listen to the podcast. I would love that. That would be amazing. Yes. Please reach out. Amazing. I will.
Come on, Tim. Get in contact.
I'll take any photos you want with my iPhone SE that I've been carrying around the last couple of years, because I'm really technologically, I'm trying to go old school as much as possible with the phone. So that's been fun. As everyone else is getting all these new cameras and all the different lenses on the iPhone, I'm going back in time. So, which has been fun because the camera still is great. And then you just get more, you can just focus on taking the photos and not having to play around with all the dials and all the different options that you have. So,
well, John, I think it's your turn to ask the final question that we ask all our guests this week.
Jeff, as you probably know, because you said you listened to the podcast, so you'll be ready for this, Jeff, if you have. There's a bit of a tester. If you could go anywhere in the world, Jeff, to photograph, where would you go and why?
I've been thinking about this all week long, and all week I came up with no answer. But because frankly, for me, like I just didn't want to like think about something that was so aspirational that might not happen. But for me, I think I would explore a place that I would want to find the most minimal scenes possible. Even more minimal than like maybe even a city can provide, or if there's that city. So, and I would just love to be there, for a long period of time, and just, kind of exploring that minimal scene, like light, shadow, day, night, the whole thing. That would be what I'd want right now. Tomorrow it'll probably be a different answer, but that's what I've come up with for today. Yesterday it was going to be London. Tomorrow was going to be Australia, probably Sydney, but today it's just the most minimal place possible. So,
Sydney's a good spot to come to, Jeff, because Melbourne's a bit like Minnesota. You just never know what weather you're going to get. You know what I mean? Could be sunny, right. Could be not. Could be cold and wet and windy. Sydney's pretty good.
That's what makes it interesting. But the US is interesting for us too in Australia, because obviously we have Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth. There's not many major cities. Adelaide, yes, of course, Adelaide. But they're all not within driving distance, really. No. Do you drive to other US cities and to photograph? I'm not sure. There's Chicago and obviously New York, which is probably not drivable either. But do you sort of get around the country a little bit?
Not as much as I'd like. I was actually in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, so I did drive there. It's about a 7-hour drive to Chicago from where I live. So, so I did do that. I think that's probably the closest big city that I can drive to. I think probably the next closest would maybe be probably like at least a full day drive, maybe 12 to 15 hours or something like that. So no, I haven't driven further than that. For me, it's always just over the years. If I have a work-related meeting, I'm always tacking on one additional day, to stay and take photos. So whether it's in Chicago or Los Angeles or, we've been in New York City, Boston, a variety of other places. So I'm going to continue that habit as long as possible. And hopefully someday I'll get to travel to many of these other places that all of your other guests have said that sound amazing, that I just didn't want to just repeat what's already been said. But the most minimal place ever. I want all one color. I want a monochrome city with no greenery at all. I just want concrete everywhere. Tell me where that is.
Well,
I just want to see that in shadow.
I've just booked a trip to Hong Kong, so I'll meet you there if you want to. So I'm going next month. So I was meant to go on a work trip that got cancelled, so I'm going to Hong Kong for a week just on my own to take photos, which is looking forward to. So let's all go, man.
Very cool.
A lot of
Sounds
content.
good.
Jeff, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you having a chat to us on the podcast. It's been an amazing conversation. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys. It's been great. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jeff.